what are the kind of the little learning levels along the way? What are the learning experiences along the way of courage and authenticity?
Fail for you.
Um, I think I think it's listening. I think it starts with like listening, which is a form of like awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then there's a bit of reflection on that, what you've heard, what you feel, what you sense. Then there's, then you can go to like acting on, or you can go to like hypothetically acting on, kind of like a thought exercise, doing a envisioning, um, and then perhaps acting on. Um, and as you act on bringing like authenticity forward, then it becomes like a sculpture. You know, when you first when you first do anything, you you bumble about it. You're just taking shots.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes people get a high off that first engagement, like, oh, I've done it, I finally did it. But I can reflect on my own experience of coming out and transitioning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, initially there was this great joy, and there still is. There's still quite a bit of joy. But then the world starts to give you feedback. People say things. Initially people in my life were very kind and pretty supportive. I was very fortunate for that. It's not the experience for many trans people. And I'm from Denton, Texas, and North Texas, and it's very supporting and loving and open-minded community generally.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, we had when we were going to school there.
mhm,
So Nova and I went to school together.
mhm,
When we went to school together, Nova, I didn't know you as Nova. I knew you by another name
mhm.
and by another gender.
That's right. Yep.
But I think when we went to school there, wasn't there a trans man that was running for mayor?
I I should know that, but I don't. So I have no idea.
Okay.
But uh, I'll look that up now. I'm really curious about that.
And tell me what you find.
Yeah.
Because this might,
Oh, I could probably text someone and get an
I
answer,
remember
but
there was this trans human.
mm-hmm,
I don't know if he went by him or her, but that
mm-hmm.
was running for mayor, and it's just a distant memory. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay, say
Yeah.
more.
So the the next wave of authenticity after you've kind of taken some action is you're gonna get like either you're gonna have self-reflection, you're gonna get some feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And then the big key is grace, giving oneself grace, or we could call it compassion. And then another level to that is giving others grace, because as you're trying to become more and more authentic, people are going to have their opinions about you, their feedback. And sometimes it's going to hurt. That we could be talking about a skill, we could be talking about changing one's style, we could be
Mm-hmm.
talking about changing one's gender. People are going to have opinions, and you have to learn to take some things in stride. And you might consider certain things because of what others say. You might say, oh, I've failed at this, or I'm failing at this. But you have to learn to say, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken 3 steps. I want to go 5 more steps. And so giving oneself grace, and then I believe in giving others grace, because otherwise, if you don't, people can end up being bitter or aggravated or angry and hateful. And I've certainly held all those feelings at times, but there's times when you have to say, I'm going to let these go, so I can in my view, more fully shine,
Yeah.
and be more holistic as in my authenticity. Um, so that ability to give grace, and then to keep going, to take more and more steps, more exploration, to be open to, who I thought I was or who I would be at the start of my transition is not who I am now. And even who I thought I would be 6 months ago is not necessarily who I am now, in both good and bad ways, in ways that I'm proud of and in ways that I've failed at, and but I will talk about specifically authenticity with with transitioning a gender. When I I've mentored a fair amount of other trans folks, and I do, you hear me a lot talk about grace.
Mm-hmm.
Grace is like a gentleness that goes within authenticity, and it pairs great with courage too. So, yeah, I think those are a lot of the kind of the levels or the phases, if you will, of authenticity. I think the last thing I'd say is that I don't believe we're ever quite done, and I don't really believe we're really meant to be done.
Right.
You know, so there's no the in my head, you know, the universe is circular, and you know, it's not necessarily you're not going to like a peak
Yeah. There's no
it's
finished product.
there's a kind of a eternal pulse, you know, to the you know, an ebb and flow,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so
What I heard was of the lessons along the way of
hmm
courage and authenticity was it begins with listening and awareness. Listening to your like your inner guidance or your
hmm
inner intuition, your inner knowing. And then it was reflecting on that. Like spending some time with that voice,
hmm
maybe turning up the volume of it and like having those inner dialogues.
hmm
Then action, and that action could be visualization. It doesn't have to be, oh, now I'm out there in the world this way. It could be like, what would my life be like
hmm
in the world that way?
yeah.
And then you said sculpture, which it was like, I thought of it as, you know, this imperfect way of realizing that visualization. It's not going to be perfect. You're not going to come out there day one and be, you know, a virtuoso pianist
hmm
or whatever it is. You're going to step out there and you're going to craft this way
hmm
or this expression. So there's a little bit of artistry to it. Sculptor's an
yeah.
artist,
Yeah,
and
and
you're
I think I said a little bit like also exploration, you
yeah,
know, that that makes your sculpture or your authenticity more multidimensional, you know.
yeah. And then it was self-reflection. So you kind of cycle back on yourself.
hmm
You're back. Hey, what was that sculpture? What was that exploration like? And through that, you're going to get some feedback, inner feedback and external feedback.
hmm
And you mentioned self-grace or self-compassion, and then
hmm
I think you were speaking to you were speaking towards giving others grace, giving others compassion. And I think what you meant or what I took from that
hmm
was the people that give you feedback that you don't really like or that's I don't want to call it negative. It's like
or
that's their
it's
thing.
hard. Sometimes you get feedback that you don't like that's hurtful.
Right.
Sometimes you get feedback you don't like that you're able to still say, well, I think it's truthful. I don't like it, but I think they might be right. And sometimes you get feedback that you deduce is just like, oh, I think that person's either just mindless or I actually think that person did this intentionally in a hurtful way. Right.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out how to allocate those things, you know. And you know, sometimes it takes weeks, it takes months, it takes years to allocate some of that
Yeah.
with people.
The first one is loving what is. Someone says, well, this is how I see it. And you say, well, I kind of see it too, but I don't really want to see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to love that
Mm-hmm.
truth or that shared awareness
Yeah.
that you're given. And the other one is maybe it's more about them, but it's not necessarily negative. Like they're not trying to be
Mm-hmm.
mean and they're giving it.
Yeah.
And it's still more about them than about some shared awareness or
Yeah.
some shared truth. And the third one is just kind of trolls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
People that are just trying to stir up and be mean to folks.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I think people who might be close to you, sometimes it's a power thing. People will sometimes people say, I mean, you know, the cliche is we hurt the people who are the closest to us, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and people who are close to you, they know you really well. They know your history, they know your vulnerabilities, And maybe they'll say something just to, maybe they're jealous about something, about you. So they'll say, "Oh, you really think you're hot stuff, don't you?" Or y- and for me, I'm like, "Oh, do I?" And do I, and then start worrying, do I come across as if I just think I'm the, the biggest biggest cheese on the planet?
You swing the biggest swinging dick around town. Is that what you're going with?
No, I love butchering. I love butchering cliches, so I just made that one up. But yeah, the biggest piece of cheese on the plate.
Yeah, I like a big piece of cheese.
Yeah. So yeah, you know, um, it's interesting kind of sifting through negative feedback because I tell you, with being a woman, being a woman who has transitioned, a lot of people have views on it. A lot of people have feedback.
Yeah.
My mom has said things to me that had no idea really. She had no clue what the impact was.
For what she said.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of cisgender women who are born assigned female at birth, have said things to me that they didn't really appreciate what they said, and whatnot. I've even had other trans women say things to me that I was like, what? Excuse me? Um, so, but we're kind of focusing on this, but it's important because going back to authenticity and courage, because if you were to listen to and hone in on that feedback or those opinions, you might decide, I'm not going to take any more steps.
Yeah, I'm going to shut the door on that.
Yeah.
The world said no, thank you.
And then
when
you're feeling that, that's when you have to say, you know what? I'm going to keep going.
And give yourself grace,
Give
and
yourself
compassion,
grace.
and give those people grace and compassion.
Yep.
One, so
Because
you're not
otherwise
bitter
you'll end up focusing on that stuff.
on them and not yourself and your own journey, your own growth.
Yeah.
Man, it can be hard, I imagine. It can be hard to trust yourself and keep going in the face of negative feedback or like mean-spirited stuff.
Yeah.
And there's that Morrissey song, or is it a Smith song? We hate it when our friends become successful.
Uh-huh.
You know that song?
I don't know. I grew up listening to the Smiths and a lot early Morrissey. So yeah.
And I imagine some folks resent when people live their authentic self because they're still in a cage.
Yeah.
And then it threatens that. Oh, I can't do that. Then they're met with a lot of,
Yeah.
oh, that means I should do that. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, I've been reflecting on some of what you're talking about here a lot lately. So I identify, I'm kind of in the middle of like modifying it, but I identify as like a gay woman, as we would call lesbian.
Mhm.
But what I found in my experience that a fair amount of lesbians, while they might be kind and supportive to transgender women, they're not going to date trans women. And the elephant in the room oftentimes has to do with the genitals. They're like, well, we're not quite into that, that stuff. And that's
The penis versus the vagina.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's cool. That's cool. I mean, I generally like like the vagina, but I have a whole poem about, it's called Penis Pussy, and it's about trans women's penises, how they're like a special version of penis.
Oh my God.
But anyhow, it's actually a really great poem. But where was I going with that? Oh, so I've had to kind of face up to that, like a fair amount of gay women kind of, I'm just blank to them. I'm not an option,
Mhm.
and that has been like a hard truth. And I've, likely comes down to like genital preference, but then I think some other of them are kind of pissed off, like that I have a certain, like, I don't know, liberation in in my expression of womanhood,
Mhm.
and vice versa, to have compassion. And I'm not talking about all people here. I hope this doesn't come across as a broad generalization, but have compassion for that, like women, whether they're gay women or not, cisgender women have to deal with tons of bullshit by society. Their lives from the moment they're born, they're being served these expectations of gender.
Mm-hmm.
And I gradually, as a trans woman, I gradually see that and learn that myself. But there's certain things that I reach for that that are, it is a liberation for me to express myself in a what we call feminine way or hyper feminine way. But for some women, that's they don't want that, and they're tired of it, and they have every right. It's not for me to decide. They have every right to feel that way. Um, but I'm trying to go back to the reason why I opened this door. But
We were talking about
I've had to deal with like some comments and being treated kind of invisible and whatnot.
I would think I would think lesbian women would be attracted to other women, like masculine, female. They would be attracted to a female energy,
and they
not necessarily the equipment.
Right. Well, I mean,
because theoretically they would use dildos and stuff. Like,
sure, and they are.
Watch some of their movies.
Yeah. Yeah, and they are, and I think a good point here. Just I always say this about trans women and like lesbians. It's like there's a spectrum of lesbians.
Oh yeah,
there's a spectrum of like trans women, and so it's just in my experience that I've had to encounter feedback and opinions sometimes, and exclusion and judgment. I bring this up because it's the area that I'm attracted to.
Yeah.
But then it's like it's been a weird experience, to identify with that and be like, oh, I've gotten a fair amount of kind of like a little bit of weirdness and exclusion and yada yada. And the point that I really want to step back to is I have to learn to go, okay, which is a weird thing. Not like just a complete passive okay, but okay, this happens.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, I used to, and I still do sometimes. It come across as like, woe me, and I've gotten to a point lately where I'm like, there's just I'm not gonna be people's, cup of tea.
Yeah.
And that's fine with them and it's fine with me.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do. That's hard. It was hard to get to that point. But it's still, it's important for me because then I say, well, I'm still valid, even if I'm, one out of 300, lesbians preference, if that, I'm still valid and being proud. I'm proud for them. I'm proud. I have lots of lesbian pride for all the different manifestations of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna, because maybe I might not find the most acceptance within there. I'm not going to get bitter about it. There's a reason why I'm proud of like why I believe in like woman to woman love. I'm very much like, we talk about being a provocateur. I don't believe in the patriarchy and the default setting for the way our society has been for thousands of years. And so I believe that woman to woman love is a very empowering, a very safe way to be for anyone who identifies as woman. But those are my philosophical beliefs, right? I'm not saying that I'm not going to go and can't enforce that on the world.
Right.
Of course, that's an absurd idea. But yeah, so I still have lots of pride, even though there's some occasionally disconnect, right? Because I think it's important to still. I think in this age, it's important to still figure out ways that we can stay connected, even when our connection is not perfect, because we have this culture of like people, canceling other people if they don't use the right words.
Well, we have echo chambers.
Yeah, you have that as well.
I think it's really important that and part of this for me is like getting alternative points of view and perspectives, folks that live a totally different life than me, so I can learn and grow.
Yeah.
It'd be like me getting a Republican or Trump supporter on here, which I would be totally open to. If there's a Trump supporter out there, I mean, I'm not personally one, but I would talk to them, and I want my existence, my frame of reference to be influenced by a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah. And there's value in it. In some of my like activism for trans rights, an angle I've taken is to actually connect with conservative politicians. There's still more work I want to do with that. But oftentimes conservative politicians don't even know trans people, which is scary because they're writing legislation to
Well,
that.
Nova, I'm pretty liberal and I don't know trans people.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm
So,
not Republican, I'm not conservative,
yeah.
and I don't.
Yeah. But I think it's important. I think it's powerful. And I think it takes courage to say, I'm going to go and talk to this quote unquote adversary.
Or someone that's
You know,
just so different
somebody
from
who's,
me.
yeah. And there's lots of benefit for oneself, for the other person, for society in general, for having those conversations. I remember being in the Texas Capitol, going to speak with, I think it's Senator Bob Hall, who is a pretty conservative senator, Texas state senator, from East Texas area. I can't remember the exact district, but had written a bill, and not in the most recent legislative session in 2023, and it was a roundabout way through like insurance kind of mandates to basically ban hormones for all trans Texans. Now the bill didn't pass, thankfully, but I was real concerned about it. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to figure out who the author of this bill is. I'm going to go talk to him, And I remember being in the Texas Capitol, and it was on a day there was lots of activity, thankfully, by lots of activists in the Texas Capitol last summer. And so there were other people there, and they're like, "What are you up to? Are you here for this? Da da da." I was like, "Actually, I'm going to go talk to," and they looked at me like, "What? Like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? Why would you go talk to this horrible person?" And I was like, because they need to be talked to.
Yeah.
We
need to talk to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that conversation actually went really well.
You talked to him.
Yeah. Yeah. I went through his, like, just sent an email through his staff, and I had like a whole scheduled appointment, and it was in the Texas Capitol.
Yeah.
Went into his office and initially had 15 minutes. That's what I asked for. We talked for almost an hour, and it was a great conversation. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about all the, everything that was covered, but there was and I kept it in my head, keep a tone of respect, because that's important to me. It's important to
build rapport.
And I charmed them with my little Texas, cutie character, but, and brought out some of my mom's like East Texas. My mom's from Texarkana, and played some of that up. I knew what I was doing, but had an educational, type of conversation with he and like two of his staffers.
I imagine that's not what folks do anymore very often. That this generation, my grandmother, she would write her senators and her Congress people. She would write them letters, and she would call them, and she would leave messages and talk to them.
Yeah, lots of people do that. Lots of people do. They really do. On all, there was over like 400, 500 pieces of anti-trans legislation last in 2023. And there were mounds of emails, mounds of recorded phone conversations. I'm talking, tens of thousands.
Wow.
So people do. They absolutely do. Now, whether they go and, think I'm going to try and talk to him, I'm not quite sure, But that was, as all this stuff was happening in April and May of last year of 23, I was becoming overwhelmed by it. Every single day, a friend would send me an article or whatnot we'd see. And I worked in UX design and tech. I worked for a well-known travel company, and I led their design, a part of their design department. Had a leadership position, had to be responsible for, 10, 15 people, designers, and make sure, just help them out, make sure that, they have what they need. And all this legislation was disrupting my ability to function.
Yeah, you were focused on that.
Yeah. There was one day I just literally spent the entire day crying.
Yeah.
In between getting on video calls for my work. And I went to my supervisor and I said, "Hey, I think I'm gonna need some time off.
Yeah.
And so I started exploring like some actions and activism, and I knew that people were coming down here, and I'm glad and thankful that they did, because they have had an impact, and they're continuing to do it, and I think we absolutely have to do that here in Texas. But I decided for myself, and I will, and I've done that a little bit in terms of being a part of like the group or the crowds that show up and they swarm the Capitol, and I think it's awesome, and they chant and they drop banners and stuff. I think it's really badass. But I thought for myself, I wanted to do something a little different, because a key of part of who I am are like relationships and conversations. And that's where I got this idea. I'm like, okay, I'm going to track down this senator who had this bill that I was really worried about, and I'm going to go talk to him, and I called a couple other ones and spoke to their staff and gave them my views and my concerns and whatnot. And
It's harder to ignore a human being sitting across the table from you talking to you for 15 minutes that turns into an hour than it is an email or a voicemail.
That's right.
That's perhaps contentious.
Like, you're looking me in the eyes.
Yeah. And there's a meeting of the minds. There's a there's a relationship building.
And they did say something to me at some point. They're like, well, Nova, we just had such a great time, chatting with you. And then they said something like, well, you're not like, all the rest of them.
The rest of them.
And actually, that was probably the moment where I had to do the most management, because I go, well, they're like, and I kind of stayed, I'd let them kind of keep feeding me what they're trying to get at. And they're like, well, they're just real angry, da, 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 and da, da. And I'm like, and I go, well, your entire party, it's on the Texas Republican platform, and they're continuing on with it. I just saw the new platform that came out. It was something like to curb the influence of transgender people in Texas society, or or something like that. That was in the previous platform that I think was from like 22 or 21. And I said, I said, your party has specifically stated and brought us, our whole class of people, which is actually mathematically a very small section of Texas society. You're saying we're gonna go after this little bitty small group of people as a platform. And I said, that's why all those people are pissed off. That's why they're angry. That's why they don't have any like decorum with you, right?
Yeah.
And I said, so I go, yeah, I may be different, but I wanted to have a civil conversation with you all, but those people are pissed off because you're targeting us, right?
And then think they're targeting, I play devil's advocate, or just they are scared of their way of life being threatened by influence.
I think on the surface, that's what they talk about. I think it's really about, on the politician level, they grab, whether it's, trans rights or, abortion, whatnot. They grab these things because the Republican Party is in such a dire straits due to the diversity of the United States, and Texas is becoming a very diverse. We already are a diverse population. That diversity does not play well with the values of the Republican Party, the classical values of the Republican Party. Instead of investing in reforming their party, they have been spending time making sure that they pick topics that get the most rabid elements of their party to show up at the polls.
To stoke their base.
That's right.
Fear.
Not even their base, to stoke the fringes,
the
extremists.
Yeah.
Because it's that 5 to 10% is what keeps their party alive in this world of diversity.
Yeah.
And so now this is, there's I'm sure there's probably lots more to it, but that's why I think they have the politicians and the parties and picked on their platform. That's why they're coming after trans people. Now, do some of them deeply, truly hate trans people? Hate/disagree, which are separate, but certainly.
You gotta know somebody to hate them, though. They hate the idea of something.
But I got the feeling and they could have just been, talking again. I always butcher cliches, talking through their teeth or whatnot. But they could have just been playing nice. But I got the sense that they actually respected me, right? And if that individual who I met with, um, truly had a deep animosity for trans people, it didn't come across that way. So who knows? Who knows? But
I think you hate ideas, though. It's harder to hate people.
I think
You meet a person, you get to know them.
yeah,
And
and that's why I think it's effective to have those, to go have a relationship type of relational activism.